I'm Mary Lyons, and I am the Wealth Woman.
And I'm Eric Alexander from Benchmark Income Group.
And this is the Big Wealth Podcast.
Everything you've ever been taught about money is wrong.
But don't worry, we're here to help.
On this podcast, we'll use the same tools you already know to actually help set you free.
Free to do what you want with your time, with your money, and with your energy. Free to live your life the way you have dreamt about.
So we're going to talk about wealth knowledge, personal reflections, and the financial industry news of the day.
Welcome to the Big Wealth Podcast.
Well, greetings. Welcome to the next episode of the Big Wealth Podcast. I'm here as always with the lovely and talented Mary Lyons. And she and I had been having conversations around a book called, I think it's The War of Art instead of The Art of War, but The War of Art with Stephen Pressfield. And, a little bit while back, we had talked about New Year's resolutions and goal setting and habit creation. And I think a lot of that and a lot of what he talks about in the book is this idea of resistance. Like there's a little tiny voice in your head that says, and maybe the angel and the devil on your shoulder, right? Maybe a better analogy of, I know I should be doing this thing, but there's this little voice that says, are you sure?
Doing something else.
Right. There's a new episode of Cobra Kai. You could be watching that right now instead of reading a book. So I know we've had a couple conversations on resistance, but you've had some sort of revelations on that kind of relatively recently.
Yeah, this topic actually came up earlier this week. I work with a business coach. You know him. I believe you work with him as well. His name's Kevin Keppel. And I was talking to Kevin because I am reading a book that he recommended called Letting Go right now. And as I was telling him that I was just starting, I believe I've just gotten through the foreword, he said, wait. You have to read this other book first. It's shorter, it's an easier read, and it's really important. And so I went out and bought it, and I'm in the middle of it right now. So I'm not super far into it, but I am finding so far everything that Stephen Pressfield says is it's hitting a chord with me. And I think about it in terms of, the conversations that we have with our clients and even with each other are frequently centered around how do you create or build a life that you are really excited to live? And it's not to say that you're going to love every moment of your life, because we don't get to write the script and we don't have complete control. Lord knows I learned that message over and over again.
Right. The hard way.
Yeah. But I think when you decide, here's what I really want and here's what's important to me. And I've watched this with new advisors. I went through this myself as a new advisor, but I think it happens to everyone, regardless of career choice, is that when you really decide what you want, there's this internal voice that pops up sometimes and says, but do this other thing, or tells you that the reason you're doing it is vanity or ego or whatever it could be. Right. And I just find that this resistance is real. And sometimes the way I know I am doing the right thing is because that resistance is there. Have you had that experience?
Yeah, I think it's, and if you're not paying attention, it just looks like distraction.
Right.
Like if you're not paying attention, it looks like, well, I just got to get this one other thing done and then I'll do that deal. Right. And I think it's even more insidious because your brain starts to make it sound like duty.
Right.
Like I've got to go take care of this one thing, because if I don't, man, I'm letting that guy down, I'm letting that girl down or whatever. Right. So it pulls you off track, and then maybe you should go do those things. Right. I've got to go eat today. You should go do that. That's not resistance.
It starts to feel sometimes like an obligation and less like excitement. Right. Or, I'll give a specific example for me, specific to social media even. Over the years, had clients who said, like, you need to be all over social media, teaching these concepts that you talk about. And, you've done so much for my life. You need to be more vocal so that more people hear the messaging of what you do. And every time I start ramping up to do it, there's this little voice inside my head that says, are you a narcissist? Is this about attention? Is it that you want people looking at you? And I'm like, no, I really don't want any of those things. I don't want to be a celebrity at all, not even a little bit. But it's weird because the purpose of the messaging is really about service and changing people's lives. Right. But there's this voice over here going, but is it? Right? And it creates doubt. And then that doubt creates fear. And then that creates this resistance of, even though I know this information is so important, especially when we get into the technical aspects of what we do,
Right.
there's this little barrier that I have to be like, no, this is important work. Check your ego, Mary. Like, just check your ego and do the work.
Right.
Right. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah. Get out of your own way a little bit. Right.
yeah. I am one of the people that you and I talk about frequently, and I'm going to bring him into this conversation,
Right.
is Jocko Willink,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And his idea of wake up in the morning and just immediately start doing what you're supposed to be doing, so you don't give that little voice time to create the resistance. Um,
Right.
and I think about that a lot, because I'm not a like wake up and jump out of bed kind of person, even
Right.
when I know like, hey, I'm going to go work out. And I find I actually have to have like that transition time from sleep to waking up, because if I
Right.
just jump out of bed, mostly I just feel nauseous. it doesn't it doesn't promote me actually working out. But I think that that's just a different kind of resistance, right? Where do
Right.
you see, when you're talking to clients about their finances, where do you see resistance showing up? Is that something that comes up in your conversations?
Yeah. All the time. Like all the time. Right. There was actually a great book that I think is a must read right beside Stephen Pressfield's Art of War. Right. And I think it's by a guy named Gay Hendricks. I'm not sure if that's the exact name, but it's something like that. But it's called The Big Leap, and it talks about that, this idea of I'm going to go do these things, but there's this little weight behind you that's sort of pulling you back from making that big leap. And I see it so often with clients, and a lot of it is around money, because money is, we have a running joke, right? Money is, we'd have an easier time talking about your sex life than your money, right? Because it's
That's
such
true.
an emotional, fearful concept, right? But I
Yeah.
think the biggest thing that people get sort of wrapped around the axle with, especially with money, is I don't know if I deserve this. Like, I
Mm.
don't know if I'm like, my parents never had money. All the people around me don't have money. And so if I manage my stuff well and I've got money, does that mean I'm sort of saying goodbye to the people that I love, that I'm somehow better than them? And am I really better than them? Like, it's just this
There's an
weird,
element of almost shame for success
totally,
that shows.
totally.
Yeah.
Well, because like, what, are you better than me? Like, no, 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 no. I'm just trying to manage my stuff better, right? We've met so many that have, my dad never went to college. My mom never went to college, sort of story.
Hmm.
And I'm going to college, and I'm the first one in my family, and now I've got a good job and I'm doing this thing. But all the rest of their extended family or immediate family are sort of still in that paradigm of, this is where we live, this is what we do.
Right.
And so it feels like you're sort of breaking with tradition almost. And there's
Right.
this sort of pull back to what you are, right? And we see that all the time, right? And people that self-sabotage and they don't even know it. Like, why are you doing that? You were so close. And
Right.
it's their brain wouldn't let them make that leap.
It's almost a return to what's comfortable, even though it's not necessarily
Right.
what would make them happy. And I think that's true. I mean, you hear the phrase poverty begets poverty. Well, I think
Right.
wealth begets wealth, right? Because it's just habit. It's what you know, it's what you're comfortable with. And I
Right.
think for people who are really trying to build true wealth for their family for the first time, even just listening to them at the beginning stages, they're so concerned with just making sure they're okay, but they don't care about taking care of the next generation or setting up their kids for a different life, right? Well, i
Right.
i have student loans and I'm doing just fine, and I didn't get an inheritance and I'm doing just fine.
Right.
And I just find that to be so fascinating, probably in part because I was raised with a different mentality about it. But I think what most people don't know when it comes to finances is that they can have their cake and eat it too. That if they
Right.
pursue the appropriate financial strategies, just by focusing on optimizing or attempting to maximize income streams in retirement, it's almost like a waterfall. Income waterfalls into liquidity, and liquidity waterfalls into legacy. And I
Right.
can say, in all honesty, one of the things that I am frequently the most proud of when it comes to the work we do is that not only do our clients usually get to spend more during retirement, but
Right.
they get to leave more behind and make an impact on the generations that follow them or the charities that they care about. And at the beginning of the process, that's almost never their priority. But at the
No, not
end of the
ever.
day, it's almost always what they're the most proud about,
Right.
you know? And I
Well,
just,
there's a passage on that in the Old Testament says that the people perish for lack of vision. And that's where I think that is, right? It's they didn't even see that that was a possibility, so they let it go. They let that out of their mind as something that they even want, because why want it? It's not possible. I'm never going to be a nuclear scientist, so I've let go of that dream because it's just not going to happen, right?
right.
I'd like to be taller and better looking. I've let that go. It's just not going to happen, right? But I think once they see that, like, it's Maslow's hierarchy, right? Once I've gotten past, hey, I can actually pay my bills and I may be able to pull this thing off. I may
Mhm.
not live under a bridge when I'm 65, right? Then it's like, well, what else is possible? Like their brains all of a sudden kind of open up to that next level.
So I think this is one of the reasons that I keep going back to this idea of why, right? I mean, I'm
Right,
weirdly obsessed with that right now. I think a lot of my social media posts are about that topic. I
right,
keep bringing it up in almost every conversation. And to that point, it's probably one of the reasons that I love Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, as much as I do, is that I think it's really hard when you don't have a vision to accomplish something. I
right,
can't remember who it was, but one of the advisors with our broker dealer made a comment that you can't hit a target that you can't see, right? And
right,
so when you think about this idea even of resistance, where we started this conversation, I think what happens is if you don't know what you're trying to do, the resistance overwhelms you because you don't know what you're fighting it for. And so
right,
this idea of vision boarding, which I'm not good at making collages. That's not my jam. But the
right,
idea of a vision board is, I think, hugely important because if you can't visualize where you want your life to go, it's almost impossible to achieve it. And I think it's so important. The conversation that Kevin and I had probably towards the beginning of last year was, what do you want from your life and why do you want it?
right,
And I was like offended that he asked me that because those are the questions I ask my clients all the time. And when it comes down to it, I'm like, well, I don't know. Aside from a couple of surface things, I had never asked myself those questions.
right,
And it
right,
it it changes things when you really go deep with that. Not just, oh, well, I want a nice house, but why? Like, what about having a nice house is important? And then
right,
as you start digging deeper, I think it's fascinating what comes out because as I did that, what surfaced for me is that everything I answered had one thing in common, and it's the search for peace, which I
right,
actually think is like where most of mankind is pointed. That's what we all want.
right,
I was
right,
like, whoa. I just hadn't thought of it that way, you know?
right. Yeah, well, that I remember watching some interviews with guys that had gone through, World War II veterans that have been through it. And one of the kind of themes that comes through all of those interviews was, at the end of the thing, all I really wanted to go home, find a quiet little piece of land that I could go just do my thing and just be left alone. Right. Like
Right.
I don't want any more drama. I've seen enough drama for a lifetime in just a couple of years, and I wanted it to be gone. Right. And they've been through those things and they see it, but we forget that because we don't, fortunately, and all wonderful things, most of us haven't had to go do that, right? But we
Right.
still have that search for, I want to know everything's okay, but I also want to think about my family. Like once I get all that stuff out of the way, I can start thinking about family and what do I want to do in my community? What do I want to do in the world around me? But
Right.
it's hard to do that when you're unstable personally.
Right.
It's hard to have that vision.
Well, and I think that's resistance again to kind of to bring it back to that. I think there's so many pressures from society to conform to certain expectations, right?
Right.
There is a very clear societal expectation for success. You look a certain way, you dress a certain way, you sound a certain way, you drive a certain car, you live in certain neighborhoods, and we can kind of
Right.
keep going, right? I mean,
Especially here in Dallas, right?
yeah, for sure. And I think success really is such a unique thing. And one of the things in this book, the War of Art, that really hit home with me, and it is this idea of individualization. We are all born with a specific set of talents, and my talents are different than your talents. And
Right.
so when I try to conform to a specific expectation, it is next to impossible for me to actually have true success, because I'm never going to be as good at being you as I could be at being
Right.
me. Right. And I actually think that might be a good place for us to stop today. And maybe
because we could go on for an hour.
Yeah, on the next one. And really get focused on the idea of individualization and identifying what your talents are and how you can pursue them. And maybe even talking a little bit about how money can play into that, using your resources appropriately. So on that note, thank you guys for joining us again, and we'll see you next time.
See you soon.